The childhood game of Hangman. But have you ever thought, why are we letting kids play a game where it involves hanging another person on a gallows? Who thought that was a good idea? You might know Hangman as a classroom game. Guess a word? Save the stick man. But what if I told you it might have started with some dark history behind it? That would actually be great. But at the end of the day, the origin of the game is still somewhat debated, as no one can say for certain how it all began. But we have some pretty good guesses. At the very beginning, this was not a children's game, but rather a parlor party for young adults and parents. First discovered version containing the written rules for the game, found in Good Housekeeping in 1885. With the guessing game beginning with the fact that back in the day, hangings were so common that many mistakes were eventually made, and innocent people would be put to death. History suggests that the guessing word game was perhaps created as a way to mock the execution process. In other words, if you made all the wrong guesses, it would be almost silly that you would be put to death in the game. An interesting explanation, but one that still holds. The second version to the story. In 17th and 18th century Europe, criminals who were sentenced to death by hanging could demand the right of words and life. A criminal to be hanged was strung up over a 5-legged stand or chair, and a board with series of short ropes representing a word was displayed. The executioner would pick the word and would use charcoal to mark correctly guessed letters on the dashes of the board, and incorrect letters to the side. At every incorrect guess, the executioner would use a sledgehammer or axe to knock away a single leg of the stand. 5 wrong guesses and the criminal was hanged. If the entire word was filled incorrectly or guessed, the condemned would be set free. The other variant we'll discuss is mentioned in a book of children's games assembly by Alice Gomes in 1894 called Birds, Beasts, and Fishes. This version lacks the image of a hanged man, instead relying on keeping the score as the number of attempts it took each player to fill in the blanks. The players would have to select one bird, beast, or fish. Write down the first and last letter of the word with dashes in between the empty spaces, and each player had 3 guesses to complete that round. Some versions of the game were played by utilizing proverbs or phrases, not individual words, and each individual letter was a separate guess. For instance, if the phrase contained multiple letters A or E, each guess would only reveal one of the letters as opposed to all. The game was initially called Hanging Proverbs, or simply The Hanging. Then, in 1905, with Mary Christiana Hoffman, in her book, she renamed the game to simply Hangman. Rules to the game evolved over time, and even in today's world, some could, and perhaps should, argue that this should no longer be a kid's game, at least now in its literal format. While this also isn't necessarily news, people in the past have swapped out the Hangman for other, less daunting things. Atari, in the beginning of its life, created the Hangman game, but instead of the gallows, they had a monkey swinging on ropes. In 2025, the latest version of the Hangman that's been utilized by most parents is called the Snowman. No gallows, no pain, just good old frosty vibes. Draw the snowman to completion, and you've lost. There are a number of other small variations to the game that changed over time, also depending on the region, could be played vastly different just based on geography. Like, sub, and hit that bell for more interesting stories.